The amber glow of fermented keth cast long shadows across the cantina's worn metal floors. The air hung thick with smoke from a dozen different worlds, mixing the sweet scent of Arcarian dreamweed with the sharp bite of Regilian fire spice. In the darkest corner of the establishment, where even the bravest smugglers feared to tread, sat a figure that made seasoned warriors cross to the other side of the room. Commander Veltarn of the Hegemony Third Fleet hunched over his table like a broken monument to past glory. His 4 massive arms, each capable of crushing a man's skull, wrapped protectively around a half-empty bottle of Andromedon spirits. The purple scales that covered his towering frame had once gleamed like polished armor, but now they were dull and scarred, telling stories of battles that most beings wouldn't survive to remember. The worst scar ran from his left temple down to his throat, a jagged line that pulsed with bioluminescent fluid when he was agitated. Tonight it glowed like a dying star. His yellow eyes, once sharp enough to spot enemy fighters at maximum sensor range, now stared into the amber liquid as if searching for answers that would never come. The cantina's other patrons whispered about him in hushed tones. Some called him the Butcher of Beta Centauri, others knew him as the hero of the vegan blockade. But those who had served under his command during the final campaigns simply called him the Broken Commander. They said he hadn't been the same since the humans arrived. A young Zephyrian journalist had been watching him for over an hour, working up the courage to approach. Her name was Kiravel, and she worked for the Galactic News Network. Had sent her to this backwater station specifically to find veterans willing to talk about the Terran War. Most refused outright, their eyes going distant the moment humans were mentioned. Others broke down completely, unable to form coherent sentences. But Veltarn was different. He was the highest-ranking officer she'd found who might actually speak. Her blue-tinged skin rippled with nervous energy as she finally stood, her recording device clutched in trembling appendages that resembled delicate tree branches. The walk across the cantina felt like crossing a minefield. Every step brought her closer to something she instinctively knew was dangerous. Other patrons stopped their conversations to watch, some shaking their heads in warning, others placing bets on whether she'd make it back alive. Veltarn didn't look up when her shadow fell across his table. His breathing was steady but labored, like a predator that had been running for too long. When she cleared her throat softly, one of his yellow eyes rolled toward her without lifting his head. Commander Veltarn. Her voice came out as barely a whisper. I'm Kiravel from the Galactic News Network. Would you speak about the humans? For a long moment, the only sound was the gentle hum of the station's life support systems and the distant chatter from the bar. Then Veltarn's head lifted slowly, revealing the full extent of the damage the war had done to him. His once proud military bearing was gone, replaced by the haunted posture of someone who had seen too much. His yellow eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her want to run. There was something predatory in that gaze, but also something broken. It was like looking into the eyes of an apex predator that had discovered it wasn't at the top of the food chain after all. The humans... ... He lifted the bottle to his lips. With one massive hand while gesturing to the chair across from him with another, his voice carried the weight of 3 standard years of nightmares. Sit, youngling. Let me tell you why we fear them. Kiravel settled into the chair, her recording device humming to life. The metal was cold against her skin, and she could smell the lingering scent of fear pheromones that previous occupants had left behind. Veltarn took a long drink, his throat working as the liquid burned its way down. When he spoke again, his voice had the quality of someone telling a ghost story around a dying fire. It began 3 cycles ago when we first encountered their scout ships near the Kepler system. Small things, barely larger than our fighters. We intercepted their transmissions, studied their technology, analyzed their biological signatures. Everything suggested we were dealing with a primitive species that had stumbled into space travel by accident. His scarred hands wrapped around the bottle, and Kiravel noticed that his claws had been filed down to blunt nubs. Standard procedure for veterans suffering from combat stress to prevent them from hurting themselves or others during episodes. They were soft-skinned bipeds who had barely mastered hyperspace technology. No natural armor, no venom sacs, no enhanced strength modifications. They seemed so fragile, so helpless. We thought they would make excellent slaves for the mining colonies. A bitter laugh escaped his throat, a sound like grinding metal. We're so certain of our superiority. The hegemony had conquered 47 systems, subjugated 30 different species. We had weapons that could crack planets, battle cruisers that dwarfed their largest vessels. What could these soft little creatures possibly do against the might of our armadas? The commander's voice dropped to a whisper that seemed to suck the warmth from the air around them. We learned too late that humanity doesn't just wage war. They are war incarnate. The battle for Station Omega-7 was our first real engagement with the humans, and it changed everything we thought we knew about warfare. Veltarn's scarred hands trembled as he poured another drink, the amber liquid catching the dim light of the cantina. His voice carried the weight of memories that refused to fade. Station Omega-7 was supposed to be a simple operation. The humans had established a small outpost in the Vega sector. Nothing more than a glorified research station with minimal defenses. Our intelligence suggested it housed maybe 300 personnel and a handful of patrol craft. Admiral Krexner saw it as the perfect opportunity to demonstrate hegemony, superiority without risking significant casualties. Krexner was old-school military, a veteran of the Andromedan campaigns, who believed in overwhelming force. He commanded 3 full battle groups, over 200 vessels ranging from massive dreadnoughts to swift interceptor squadrons. The flagship alone, the Devastator, was 3 kilometers of pure destruction, bristling with plasma cannons and quantum torpedoes. When our scouts reported the human response, Krexner actually laughed. 12 ships. 12 tiny vessels that barely registered on our sensors. They looked like toys compared to our battle cruisers, sleek and silver with strange angular designs that seemed almost primitive. The largest was maybe 400 meters, long dwarfed by even our smallest frigates. The journalist leaned forward, captivated despite the growing sense of dread that seemed to emanate from the veteran's story. Her recording device captured every word, every pause, every bitter laugh that escaped his scarred throat. Their fleet commander was a human. Female called Captain Kim Mira. We intercepted her communications, analyzed her voice patterns, studied her psychological profile. She was young by human standards, maybe 35 standard years, with short black hair and eyes that seemed to burn within her fire. According to our intelligence, she had graduated from something called the Terran Naval Academy, just 10 years. Earlier, when Admiral Krexner opened a communication channel to offer terms of surrender, Captain Kim's response echoed across every bridge in our fleet. She looked directly into the camera, her expression calm and almost amused, and she laughed. Not the nervous giggle of a frightened primitive, but a genuine, delighted laugh that sent chills down the spines of seasoned warriors. Admiral, she said in perfect hegemony standard, we didn't come here to negotiate. Her voice carried a confidence that seemed impossible given the odds she faced. We came here to teach you something about humanity. That should have been our first warning. The fact that she spoke our language flawlessly, that she knew our customs well enough to address Krexner by his proper title, that she seemed genuinely excited about the prospect of facing overwhelming odds. But we were too arrogant to see the signs. Veltarn's eyes grew distant, staring past the journalist into memories that played out like a nightmare behind his yellow pupils. The scarred veteran's voice took on a hollow quality, as if he were speaking from the bottom of a deep well. What followed was unlike any battle I had witnessed in 40 years of military service. We opened with a standard bombardment pattern, plasma cannons firing in coordinated volleys that should have turned those 12 ships into expanding clouds of superheated metal. Our weapons were designed to punch through the heaviest armor, to reduce enemy vessels to their component atoms. The human ships moved like nothing we had ever seen. Where our vessels were built for raw power and intimidation, theirs seemed to dance through space. They scattered the moment we opened fire, breaking formation in ways that violated every principle of military doctrine we knew. Our targeting. Computers couldn't lock onto them. their movements too erratic, too unpredictable. Captain Park Jin-ho commanded one of their destroyers, a sleek vessel that seemed to twist and turn through our weapons fire like a living thing. While we tried to maintain our battle line, following thousands of years of proven tactics, the human ships regrouped behind our formation with impossible speed. They had somehow circled around our entire fleet in less than 30 minutes, but it wasn't their speed that terrified us. It was their weapons. Where we relied on energy-based systems, the humans used kinetic rounds, simple metal projectiles, accelerated to significant fractions of light speed. Our shields, designed to deflect plasma and laser fire, were useless against solid matter moving at those velocities. The first salvo punched through our outer perimeter like it was made of paper. 3 of our frigates simply ceased to exist, their hulls torn apart by rounds that passed completely through them. The sound of metal screaming as it was ripped apart echoed through our communication channels, sound that still haunts my dreams. Then, Captain Park Jin-ho did something that defied all logic. His destroyer, already damaged from our return fire, suddenly accelerated directly toward our flagship. Not in an attempt to ram us, but heading straight for the Devastator's main hangar bay. Our point defense systems opened up, filling space with a web of destruction that should have vaporized his ship instantly. The human vessel took hit after hit, pieces of hull plating spinning away, atmosphere venting from multiple breaches. But it kept coming. Park Jin-ho's voice came across the communication channels, calm and steady, even as his ship died around him. Some kind of human battle song that made the hair on my neck stand up. His destroyer reached the hangar bay and detonated in a ball of nuclear fire that crippled our command structure. The explosion took out our primary communication array, our sensor grid, and most of our senior staff, his massive frame shuddering. With the memory, he lifted the bottle to his lips with hands that shook like leaves in a storm. When he spoke again, his voice was barely a whisper. In 6 hours, they turned what should have been a simple police action into a complete rout. Our 200 ships, our overwhelming numerical advantage, our superior firepower, none of it mattered. The humans picked us apart like children dismantling toys. Of our mighty fleet, only 37 vessels managed to escape the battle zone. Humans lost 4 ships. 4. And they considered that an acceptable exchange rate. But that was just the beginning. The beginning of our education in the true nature of humanity. The siege of New Centauri changed everything. We thought we knew about warfare and the human capacity for psychological manipulation. Veltarn's voice carried a tremor of remembered terror as he stared into the depths of his glass, the amber liquid reflecting the haunted expression in his yellow eyes. New Centauri was supposed to be our redemption. After the disaster at Station Omega-7, High Command needed a decisive victory to restore confidence in hegemony military superiority. The target seemed perfect, a small human research colony on the edge of their expanding territory. Intelligence. Reports indicated minimal defensive capabilities. A skeleton crew of scientists and engineers with only token military protection. We approached the operation with overwhelming force. 50,000 of our finest troops, backed by orbital bombardment platforms that could reduce continents to glass. Atmospheric suppressors hung in the upper atmosphere like metal moons, ready to choke the life from the planet if the humans refused to surrender. It should have been a simple mop-up operation, a chance to demonstrate that the defeat at Omega-7 was just a fluke. The colony itself sat in a valley surrounded by jagged mountains, a cluster of prefabricated buildings and research facilities that looked fragile against the harsh landscape. From orbit, it seemed almost pathetic, a tiny outpost of human civilization that could be erased with a single bombardment. Around the settlement, the journalist's recording device hummed softly in the cantina's oppressive silence. Other patrons had stopped their conversations entirely, drawn in by the veteran's tale, despite not understanding his words. There was something in his tone, a quality of absolute horror that transcended language barriers. The colony's military commander was Lieutenant Colonel Lee Doyon, a man whose psychological profile suggested he was more scientist than soldier. Our intelligence indicated he had only 300 Marines under his command. Recent graduates from human military academies with no combat experience. What our intelligence failed to mention was that Lee had been studying us for months, dissecting every aspect of hegemony biology, culture, and military doctrine. The first sign that something was wrong came during our initial advance. As our troops moved through the mountain passes, they began reporting strange sounds over their communication systems. At first, it seemed like equipment malfunction, random static and interference. But then we realized the truth. The humans were broadcasting recordings of our own soldiers' death screams from previous battles. Playing them on frequencies that resonated with hegemony hearing organs, Veltern's purple scales darkened with emotion, shifting from their normal violet hue to a deep, troubled indigo. His forearms moved restlessly, one gripping his drink while the others clenched and unclenched in remembered anguish. The psychological effect was devastating. Our soldiers, veterans of countless campaigns, began to break down as they heard the final moments of their fallen comrades echoing from hidden speakers throughout the valley. The humans had somehow obtained audio recordings from our own battle networks, turning our dead into weapons against the living. But that was just the beginning of their psychological assault. As our forces closed in on the colony perimeter, they encountered clouds of chemical agents that seemed harmless at first. Our environmental suits registered no toxins, no dangerous compounds, nothing that should have affected us. What we didn't realize was that the chemicals were designed to trigger specific biological responses in hegemony physiology. The compounds mimicked our species' mating pheromones, causing mass confusion in our ranks as soldiers suddenly became overwhelmed with reproductive instincts in the middle of a combat zone. Command structure broke down as officers found themselves unable to focus on tactical objectives, their minds clouded by chemically induced biological impulses that made rational thought nearly impossible. Captain Choi Ha-jin led the most disturbing aspect of the human defense strategy. While our forces struggled with chemical warfare and psychological manipulation, her special operations team was conducting night raids on our forward positions. But instead of simply eliminating our troops, his massive frame shuddering with the memory of discovering what the humans had done with their fallen comrades, found the first impersonator 3 days into the siege, one of our own communication officers, or so we thought, walking through our command post with apparent confidence. It wasn't until he began accessing classified tactical data that someone noticed his behavior patterns were slightly off. When security moved to question him, they discovered the horrible truth. The figure wasn't a hegemony officer at all. Like a grotesque disguise, she'd been feeding false information to our commanders for hours, subtly sabotaging equipment and redirecting our forces into prepared ambush zones. The discovery sent shockwaves through our entire army. If one human had successfully infiltrated our most secure positions, how many others were among us? Paranoia spread like a virus as soldiers began to question everyone around them. Officers who had served together for decades suddenly viewed each other with suspicion, wondering if their longtime comrades were actually human agents in disguise. The psychological warfare escalated. As more impersonators were discovered, the humans had somehow obtained detailed biological samples from our fallen troops and were using advanced surgical techniques to create perfect physical duplicates. They moved through our ranks like ghosts, spreading disinformation, sabotaging equipment, and eliminating key personnel while wearing the faces of our own dead. Within a week, we were shooting at shadows, executing our own officers for suspected collaboration with the enemy. The humans had turned us into our own worst enemy, using our natural suspicion and military hierarchy against us. Every order from a superior became suspect. Every report from the field potentially compromised. The final blow came when we realized that Lieutenant Colonel Lee Doyan had been broadcasting our private communications to the entire galaxy. Every tactical discussion, every moment of fear or doubt, every breakdown in discipline was being transmitted across known space as evidence of hegemony weakness. The humans weren't just defeating us militarily, they were destroying our reputation as an effective fighting force. In the end, the siege collapsed not because of superior human firepower, but because we could no longer trust ourselves. Our 50,000 troops retreated in complete disorder, abandoning equipment and positions as officers lost all confidence in their ability to distinguish friend from foe. The humans had defeated us through pure psychological manipulation, turning our own minds into weapons against ourselves. Military force. That was when we truly began to understand what we were facing. Humanity wasn't just another species with advanced technology. They were apex predators who hunted minds instead of bodies. The final campaign began with what humans call acceptable losses, a concept so alien to our way of thinking that we completely failed to understand its implications. Veltarne's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might summon the ghosts of that terrible battle back into the cantina's smoky atmosphere. By this point in the war, we had learned to respect human cunning, but we still believed we understood their limitations. The Battle of the Seven Suns was supposed to be our decisive victory, the engagement that would finally break the back of human resistance and restore hegemony dominance to the galaxy. We had assembled the largest battle fleet in our history. Over 500 vessels commanded by our most experienced admirals. General Oteman commanded the human forces, a middle-aged officer with graying hair and tired eyes who had earned a reputation for unconventional tactics. Our intelligence networks had been working for months to penetrate human communications, and finally, we achieved what we thought was a major breakthrough. We intercepted detailed battle plans showing a massive human offensive targeting our industrial centers in the Rigel sector. The plans were perfect, almost too perfect. They showed troop movements, supply lines, weaknesses in human formations that we could exploit. Our strategists spent weeks analyzing every detail, preparing counters for every possible human move. We positioned our fleets exactly where they needed to be to crush the human offensive before it could begin. The journalist watched as the veteran's massive hands clenched into fists, his claws leaving small scratches in the metal table. The bioluminescent scar on his throat pulsed with a sickly green light as his emotional state deteriorated. It was all deliberate manipulation. Every intercepted communication, every leaked battle plan, every apparent vulnerability in their defenses. The humans wanted us to intercept those communications, while we prepared our forces to counter their fake offensive in the Rigel sector. Major Nam Seol-yoon was leading the real assault 3 systems away, targeting our primary military shipyards in the Capella system. But that level of deception, while impressive, wasn't what broke our spirits. What truly terrified us was discovering how they had made their deception so convincing. The fake offensive wasn't just a collection of empty ships and false signals. It was a real attack, with real soldiers who knew they were going to die. Colonel Yoon Min-ho commanded the diversionary force. 15 battle cruisers and over 200 support vessels carrying 20,000 of humanity's finest soldiers. When we studied the recovered communications afterward, we discovered something that chilled our blood to absolute zero. Min-ho had volunteered for the mission, knowing full well it was a suicide run designed to gather intelligence for the real. The cantina around them had fallen completely silent, as if the very air was holding its breath to hear the veteran's words. The diversionary attack began exactly as the intercepted plans indicated. Human forces jumped into the Rigel system and immediately engaged our waiting fleets. From our perspective, it looked like we had achieved the perfect ambush. Our ships outnumbered theirs 3-1. Our positioning was flawless, our firepower overwhelming. But something was wrong with how the humans fought. They weren't trying to win, they were trying to learn. Every engagement seemed designed to test our capabilities, to push our defenses to their limits, and see how we responded. Colonel Yoon Min-ho's flagship drove straight into the heart of our formation, broadcasting detailed scans of our defensive arrangements even as it was being torn apart by concentrated fire. The human soldiers fought with a ferocity that bordered on madness, but it was a controlled madness, a calculated fury that served a purpose beyond simple destruction. They weren't fighting to achieve victory in that battle. They were fighting to ensure victory in a battle we didn't even know was happening. 15,000 humans died in that diversionary attack. Their ships reduced to expanding clouds of superheated plasma and twisted metal. But as they died, they transmitted everything they learned about our tactics, our weapons, our weaknesses to major Nam-Seo Yoon's forces attacking our shipyards 3 systems away. When we finally analyzed the recovered data cores from the human ships, we discovered something that fundamentally changed our understanding of what we were fighting. Those soldiers had known from the beginning that they were participating in a suicide mission. The mission briefings were all there, clear and unambiguous. This was a one-way trip designed to gather intelligence for the real offensive. The most disturbing part wasn't that they had accepted the mission, but how they had accepted it. The recordings showed human soldiers actually volunteering for the assignment, competing for the chance to sacrifice their lives for a strategic advantage they might never live to see implemented. As their ships burned and their hulls cracked, open to the vacuum of space, the humans sang. Not screams of terror or desperate pleas for rescue, but organized battle songs that echoed across our communication channels. They sang about honor, about duty, about concepts we couldn't translate properly into our language because they had no equivalent in hegemony culture. The commander's voice cracked as he continued, his massive frame trembling with emotion that ran too deep for words. We fight for territory, for resources, for survival, for things we can see and touch and measure. Humans fight for ideas that exist only in their minds, concepts so abstract that most species can't even comprehend them. They were willing to die, not for victory, but for the mere possibility that their sacrifice might help others achieve victory later. What kind of species produces warriors who embrace death not as a last resort but as a tactical option? What kind of military doctrine treats the complete annihilation of your own forces as an acceptable cost for gathering information? We had encountered fanatics before, religious zealots and ideological extremists who would die for their beliefs. This was different. These were professional soldiers making calculated decisions about acceptable losses that included their own lives. While we were celebrating our victory over Colonel Yoon Minho's forces, Major Nam-Seo Yoon's attack destroyed our primary shipyards, crippling our ability to replace the vessels we were losing in the war. The intelligence gathered by the dying humans had shown her exactly where to strike for maximum effect. That was when we finally understood what we were facing. This wasn't a war between two military forces competing for resources or territory. This was a collision between two completely different philosophies of existence. We were fighting an enemy that viewed individual survival as less important than collective success. Soldiers who could calculate the value of their own lives in tactical terms and find that value acceptable. The humans had turned themselves into a weapon we couldn't defend against because it required them to destroy themselves to use it. They were willing to pay prices for victory that we couldn't even imagine paying, to make sacrifices that seemed impossible to any rational military mind. That's when we realized we weren't fighting an enemy in any conventional sense. We were fighting a force of nature, a species that had evolved beyond normal concepts of self-preservation into something that treated death as just another tool in their tactical arsenal. The war was already over. We just hadn't realized it yet. The cantina had grown quiet around them. Other patrons unconsciously drawn to the veteran's tale, despite their inability to understand his words. There was something in Veltarna's tone, a quality of absolute dread, that transcended language barriers and spoke directly to the primal fears buried deep in every sentient mind. Even the crystalline bartender had stopped polishing glasses, her faceted body refracting the amber light, as she listened to sounds that carried more meaning than words. The war ended not with our defeat, but with our enlightenment. Veltarna's voice carried the weight of exhaustion that came from carrying terrible knowledge for too long. His 4 massive arms hung limply at his sides, the fight drained out of him by memories that refused to fade. Admiral Roxton, the greatest military mind in hegemony history, ordered the complete withdrawal of all forces after studying captured human casualty reports and strategic assessments. What we discovered in those documents changed everything. We thought we knew about warfare, about humanity, about our place in the cosmic order. The journalist leaned forward, her recording device capturing every word as Veltarn's voice dropped to a whisper that seemed to suck the warmth from the air. Around them, throughout the entire war, from the first engagement at Station Omega-7 to the final battle at the Seven Suns, humanity had been operating at 30% capacity. 30%. The fleets that had shattered our armadas, the weapons that had torn through our defenses like paper, the soldiers who had driven our veterans to madness with their psychological warfare, all of it was just a fraction of human military capability. Their main battle fleets remained stationed around their core worlds, massive armadas that dwarfed anything we had encountered. Their primary weapons, devices that could apparently crack planets or manipulate the very fabric of space-time, had never been deployed against us. Their industrial capacity, their research facilities, their training academies, all operating at minimal output, while they fought what they considered a minor border conflict. Veltarn finished his drink and stared into the empty bottle, seeing reflections of battles that had cost him everything he once believed about military superiority. The bioluminescent scar on his throat pulsed with a sickly rhythm, like a dying heart struggling to keep beating. The peace accords were signed in a neutral space station orbiting a dead star, chosen specifically because it was far from any inhabited worlds. The hegemony delegation arrived expecting to negotiate terms of surrender, to discuss reparations and territorial concessions. Instead, they found themselves facing Secretary General Park Soo-yang, small human woman with silver hair and eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of ages. She was polite throughout the negotiations, diplomatic in ways that made our ambassadors uncomfortable. There was no gloating, no demands for tribute or submission. She spoke of cooperation, of mutual benefit, of working together toward common goals. Her gracious behavior in victory was almost more unsettling than human brutality in battle. But it was when our chief negotiator, Admiral Kethfer, asked the question that had been burning in every hegemony mind that we truly understood what we had been fighting. Why had the humans held back their full strength? Why had they allowed the war to drag on for 3 years when they could have ended it in months, possibly weeks? The veteran's voice dropped to barely a whisper, forcing the journalist to lean closer to catch his words. Park Soo-young's response had been recorded, transmitted to every military command in the galaxy, studied by xenobiologists trying to understand the human psyche. She said they were preparing for something else, something that their deep space sensor arrays had detected moving through the void between galaxies, something that made the hegemony look like children playing with toys. The humans hadn't been fighting to conquer us. They had been fighting to preserve us, to keep our military structure intact because they needed allies for the real war that was coming. The implications were staggering. Why we had been throwing our best forces against what we thought was humanity's full military might. They had been treating the entire conflict as a training exercise. Every battle, every engagement, every tactical innovation had been designed to prepare both human and hegemony forces for something far worse than anything we could imagine. Veltarn looked up at the journalist with eyes that had seen too much, yellow orbs that reflected the terrible knowledge he carried like a curse. We thought we were apex predators, the dominant force in the galaxy. Our species had conquered 47 star systems, subjugated 30 different civilizations, built an empire that spanned hundreds of light years. We believed ourselves to be the ultimate expression of military evolution. But humans are what? Apex predators fear in the dark. They are the thing that waits beyond the edge of known space, watching, preparing, calculating threats that we can't even perceive. While we fought over territory and resources, they were scanning the cosmic background radiation for signs of entities that could threaten entire galaxies. The journal recordings we found afterward painted a picture of human civilization that defied everything we thought we knew about interstellar societies. They weren't expanding into space because they wanted to conquer new worlds. They were expanding because they were running from something, or preparing to fight something. That made their conflict with us look like a minor skirmish. Their deep space monitoring stations, hidden throughout the galaxy, had been tracking massive gravitational anomalies moving through the void between galaxies. Objects the size of solar systems, traveling at speeds that shouldn't be possible, heading directly toward our local galactic cluster. The humans estimated arrival time at somewhere between 50 and 100 standard years. The journalist sat in stunned silence as Velton rose unsteadily to his feet, his massive frame swaying slightly from the effects of the alcohol and the weight of his memories. The cantina around them seemed to shrink, the walls pressing in as the implications of his story settled into her mind like lead weights. Now you know why we whisper their names in the dark. Why veteran soldiers wake, screaming from dreams of human laughter echoing through burning starships. It's not because they defeated us in battle. It's because we learned that in the vast cosmos, we are not the hunters. We never were. We were just prey animals that had never encountered a real predator. The humans are out there now, preparing for a war that will make everything we've experienced look like children playing with toys. They're building weapons we can't understand, training soldiers for battles we can't imagine. It's making preparations for a conflict that will determine whether organic life survives in this galaxy. And the most terrifying part is that they're counting on us to help them. The peace treaty wasn't just an end to hostilities. It was a recruitment contract for the real war to come. Every hegemony ship, every soldier, every tactical innovation that we developed fighting them, it's all part of their grand strategy to prepare for something that makes our nightmares look like pleasant dreams. The commander walked away, his footsteps echoing in the sudden silence of the cantina. Other patrons avoided his gaze, instinctively recognizing the aura of someone who had seen beyond the veil of comfortable illusions into the true nature of the universe. The young journalist sat alone with her recording device and the terrible knowledge that somewhere in the void between galaxies, something was coming that would test every assumption about survival, about civilization, about the very nature of existence itself, in humanity. The species that had shattered the hegemony's military might while operating at 30% capacity considered it a threat worth preparing for. The war with the humans had ended. But the real war was just beginning. The end.